I think it's very entertaining. I do. But I love music. I love to hear the voice, the human instrument.
When 15-year-old Whitney Houston was offered a dream record deal by Luther Vandross, her mother, Sissy Houston, did the unthinkable. She said no. In this deep dive, we reveal the untold truths Sissy finally shared from a childhood throat injury that almost stole Whitney's voice forever, to the strict military-style training and early family secrets that shaped the world's greatest vocalist before she ever signed with Clive Davis. Whitney Elizabeth Houston was not born into musical royalty by accident. She was the product of a genetic and spiritual lineage, deeply steeped in the soil of gospel and soul music. Her maternal family, the Drinkards, had migrated from Georgia to Newark, New Jersey, in the late 1920s, carrying with them a rich oral tradition of church singing. Sissy Houston, born Emily Drinkard, was the youngest of 8 children, and by the age of 5, she was already performing alongside her siblings as the Drinkard Singers. This legendary family ensemble would go on to record the first ever major label live gospel album, A Joyful Noise. For RCA, this extraordinary family tree expanded to include Whitney's first cousins, the iconic soul singers Dionne Warwick and Dee Dee Warwick, as well as her legendary cousin, opera soprano Leontine Price. Growing up in this environment, Whitney did not merely listen to music, she inhaled it. The living rooms and church pews of Newark were her classrooms, where some of the finest vocalists in American history gathered to harmonize, establishing a legacy of vocal mastery that Whitney would eventually inherit. At the center of this musical dynasty stood Sissy Houston, a towering figure whose influence on popular music extended far beyond being Whitney's mother. Long before her daughter became a household name, Sissy was a highly respected session vocalist and a Grammy-winning force in her own right. In 1967, she founded the legendary vocal group The Sweet Inspirations, a Grammy-nominated quartet that became the gold standard for background vocal arrangements in New York and Atlantic City. With her pristine pitch and commanding lead vocals, Sissy led the group as they backed Aretha Franklin on timeless hits like A Natural Woman, and famously toured as the primary vocal support for Elvis Presley during his historic Las Vegas residency. Sissy also lent her remarkable voice to Jimi Hendrix, Dusty Springfield, and Otis Redding. She was a consummate professional, a singer's singer who understood the mechanics of the voice, the science of arrangement, and the emotional delivery required to move thousands of people, whether in a crowded church or a packed arena. Despite her immense success and the respect she commanded, Sissy's decades in the music industry during the 1960s and 1970s had left her with deep, permanent scars. She had witnessed firsthand the predatory, financially exploitative, and racially biased underbelly of show business. Black artists, especially women, were routinely underpaid, overworked, and denied the ownership of their master recordings. Sissy knew the exhaustion of grueling road tours, the cold reality of cheap motel rooms, and the pervasive presence of drugs and alcohol that destroyed so many of her peers. She understood that talent alone was never enough to survive the vultures of the music business. Consequently, when she recognized the terrifyingly immense vocal potential of her young daughter, Whitney, her immediate reaction was not opportunistic excitement, but a profound, protective caution. Sissy was determined that Whitney would not be devoured by the industry, nor would she be allowed to step onto a stage until she was mentally, emotionally, and technically secure. Sissy's protective nature meant she fiercely shielded Whitney from early exploitation. In a culture where talented children were often pushed into the spotlight by eager parents seeking a quick payday, Sissy stood as an unyielding wall. She refused to let Whitney record professionally as a child, insisting that her daughter understand the true weight of the gift she possessed. Sissy believed that a singer must feel the reality of life before they can convey real emotion to an audience. She wanted Whitney to have a relatively normal childhood, to play in the streets of Newark, and to develop a strong sense of self-worth that was independent of fame and public adulation. Sissy wanted her daughter to be secure in her identity as Nippy before the world tried to define her as The Voice. This psychological preparation was just as critical as the physical training, as Sissy knew that the psychological pressures of fame could destroy a young mind faster than vocal strain could ruin a career. To prepare her daughter with the most complete foundation, Sissy established a vocal training regimen so grueling that it turned their family living room and the New Hope Baptist Church into rooms of steel discipline. Before Whitney Houston ever stepped in front of a microphone to record her historical pop anthems, she had to master the absolute physical mechanics of her vocal instrument under Sissy's unforgiving gaze. Sissy understood that a truly powerful voice was built from the ground up, starting with proper physical conditioning, to ensure Whitney did not fall into the common trap of shallow, tight chest breathing. she trained her daughter in the strict art of diaphragmatic breathing. Sissy's methods were highly athletic and intensely rigorous. She instructed Whitney to practice running and physical exercises while running scales, forcing her to control her air intake under intense physical exertion. This highly unconventional training method optimized Whitney's lung capacity and taught her to support her soaring high notes with the massive muscle power of her diaphragm rather than straining her throat. This physical stamina was the exact secret that later allowed Whitney to execute those sweeping, effortless transitions from her deep chest register to her crystal-clear head voice without ever losing her breath or pitch during marathon live shows. Sissy's vocal curriculum extended far beyond merely hitting impressive high notes. She was deeply obsessed with the intellectual art of storytelling through music. She constantly reminded Whitney that every song is a story, and that a true artist must treat every word with absolute reverence. To achieve this, Sissy spent countless hours refining Whitney's diction, pronunciation, and the precise articulation of every single syllable. She taught her daughter how to control her vibrato, how to shape her vowels, and how to project her voice to reach the very back of a crowded room without screaming. Furthermore, Sissy trained Whitney in the highly nuanced art of stage presence. While watching her mother arrange complex vocal sessions at Atlantic Records and headline legendary New York cabaret clubs like Sweetwater's and Reno Sweeney, Whitney absorbed the quiet, commanding posture of a professional. Sissy taught her how to stand confidently, how to connect with the audience, and how to project a dignified authority on stage. This high-level training was delivered with an unyielding, military-style discipline that left absolutely no room for laziness or vocal complacency. Rehearsing in their East Orange living room and the choir loft of Newark's New Hope Baptist Church, Sissy was an incredibly strict and uncompromising mentor. If Whitney went flat on a single note, rushed a phrasing, or showed even a minor lack of focus, Sissy would immediately cut the music off and make her start the entire song over from the very beginning. To build an unbreakable psychological armor in her daughter, Sissy even employed extreme, hands-on teaching tactics. On several occasions during Whitney's teenage years, Sissy would fake being sick right before a headline gig. She would call a teenage Whitney at the last minute, announcing she was too ill to sing and that Whitney would have to take her place on stage. This forced her daughter to face crowded rooms completely unprepared, building a legendary level of stage discipline that ensured Whitney would never panic under pressure. Behind this relentless steel discipline was a profound, strategic vision that Sissy had carefully mapped out for her daughter's future. Sissy was not merely trying to help her daughter find local success. She was systematically engineering a vocal phenomenon designed to completely shatter the rigid, racially segregated barriers of the 1980s music industry. During that era, Black female vocalists were routinely pigeonholed into specific urban R&B or gospel markets, rarely allowed to cross over into mainstream pop radio. Sissy knew that to break down these formidable commercial walls, Whitney's vocal technique had to be so undeniably precise, so technically supreme, and so universally appealing that no record executive or white audience could ever dismiss her based on her race. She built Whitney's voice to be a majestic, unassailable force that transcended demographics, paving the way for her to become the voice of a generation. However, this entire training plan was almost permanently derailed by a terrifying childhood accident and a daring decision by her mother to refuse a life-altering opportunity. The extraordinary voice of Whitney Houston, which would later move millions of listeners across the globe, was almost permanently silenced before she even had a chance to share it with the world. In her 2013 memoir, Remembering Whitney, Sissy Houston shared a terrifying, little-known medical crisis from Whitney's early childhood. While playing a game with her brother, a very young Whitney was running around the house with a metal coat hanger dangling in her mouth. During a moment of innocent wrestling, her brother accidentally bumped the hanger, driving it deep into the back of her mouth. As she pulled the metal piece out in pain, she ripped a significant portion of the roof of her mouth, causing a horrific, bloody emergency. The panicked family rushed her to the hospital, where the emergency doctors delivered a chilling warning. The metal hanger had come within a single inch of her vocal cords. If the tear had gone any deeper, Whitney's voice box would have been permanently destroyed, leaving her unable to speak for the rest of her life, let alone sing. This terrifying close call had a profound, lifelong impact on both Whitney and her mother. Rather than simply viewing the survival of her voice as a lucky medical escape, the deeply religious Houston family interpreted it as a moment of divine intervention. It instilled a quiet but powerful sense of spiritual destiny in young Whitney, leading her to believe that her voice was a sacred gift, protected by a higher power for a specific purpose. This deep-seated conviction gave her an inner confidence that shielded her from early insecurities, helping her navigate her development with a unique sense of grace. Sissy, too, realized that she was the custodian of a miraculous talent. This made her even more protective of her daughter's development, convincing her that they must treat Whitney's vocal gift with absolute reverence, never rushing or exploiting it for short-term commercial gain. This protective philosophy was put to the ultimate test when Whitney was just 15 years old. While performing background vocals alongside her mother in prestigious New York clubs, the teenager's towering talent caught the attention of some of the most powerful gatekeepers in the music industry. Among them was the legendary R&B singer and producer Luther Vandross, who was a close session singing partner and friend of Sissy. Vandross was so utterly stunned by Whitney's pristine vocal tone and raw power that he immediately recognized her as a future superstar. Believing she was ready for the global stage, Vandross, alongside legendary executives like Elektra Records president Bruce Lundvall, approached Sissy with a concrete offer to sign and produce Whitney's first professional recording contract. For most aspiring singers and their parents, this was a dream opportunity that would justify a lifetime of struggle. To the utter shock of Luther Vandross and the record executives, Sissy Houston delivered a firm, unyielding no. In an industry defined by greed and short-lived fame, her decision was almost unheard of. Sissy's refusal did not stem from a lack of confidence in Whitney's star potential. Rather, it was because she was entirely certain of her daughter's future greatness. She understood that entering the highly competitive, high-pressure, and often toxic music industry at such a tender age would lead to premature burnout and emotional exploitation. Sissy insisted that Whitney must first finish her high school education, preserve the final years of her youth, and learn the essential virtue of patience. She wanted her daughter's mind and character to grow as strong as her vocal cords before she had to carry the crushing weight of global fame. By forcing Whitney to wait, Sissy protected her from the predatory structures of the industry, ensuring she would enter the business on her own terms. Sissy's extreme patience was ultimately rewarded when Whitney turned 19. But the radiant light of the historic recording contract with Clive Davis would unwittingly tear the young girl's life into two opposing entities. In 1983, a 19-year-old Whitney Houston was performing at a Manhattan nightclub when she was spotted by Clive Davis, the legendary president of Arista Records. Stunned by her rare vocal presence, Davis immediately signed her to a multi-album contract. However, Davis had a very specific, calculated vision for her career. Rather than letting her record raw, traditional African-American R&B or gospel music, Davis meticulously groomed Whitney to become a crossover pop icon. He selected pristine, highly polished pop ballads, enforced an image of sophisticated elegance, and consciously steered her away from the gritty urban sounds of the era. The objective was to create an immaculate, multi-ethnic public image that would appeal seamlessly to the massive, mainstream white consumer market, breaking down historical racial barriers in the music industry. While Clive Davis succeeded in presenting the voice to the world, this carefully manufactured image created a deep, painful division within her personal identity. In her poignant memoir, Remembering Whitney, Sissy Houston revealed the profound psychological toll this dual existence took on her daughter. To the public, she was Whitney Houston, the pristine, polite, and immaculate pop princess who belonged to everyone. But at home and among those who loved her, she remained Nippy, the nickname her father, John Houston, had affectionately given her after a mischievous, high-spirited comic book character. Nippy was a fun-loving, street-smart New Jersey girl who loved her freedom, spoke with a gritty East Orange accent, and fiercely resisted the rigid, clean-cut constraints of her public persona. Sissy recalled that Whitney was acutely aware of this synthetic split, often viewing her celebrity persona as a separate employee she had to manage. On grueling global tours, when the crushing weight of public expectations and the demand for perfection became too heavy to bear, Whitney would play act as her own guardian to cope with the exhaustion. Backstage, surrounded only by her innermost circle of trusted intimates, she would sigh wearily and announce, "Okay, it's time to go be Whitney Houston." Conversely, when the intense promotional duties, concerts, and interviews were finally over for the day, she would slump back into her dressing room chair and say, "I'm tired. It's time to put Nippy to bed." This poignant self-awareness demonstrated how early she had decoupled her true, vulnerable self from the monumental brand that she was forced to project to the world. This struggle for identity was further complicated by the harsh backlash Whitney faced from her own community. Because Clive Davis's crossover strategy was so incredibly successful, some sections of the black music community accused Whitney of selling out her cultural heritage. Sissy Houston vividly recalled the heartbreak of the 1989 Soul Train Music Awards, where her daughter was openly booed by the audience for being too white. This rejection devastated Nippy, who viewed herself as a proud product of the Newark Church Choir. The pressure to remain an immaculate, crossover pop icon while being rejected by her own peers forced her deeper into a corner. The pristine image demanded by Arista Records left absolutely no room for Nippy's real human flaws, creating a psychological pressure cooker that desperately needed an escape valve. The agonizing conflict between the rebellious Nippy in real life and the immaculate Whitney before the public eventually pushed her to seek a dangerous escape, one that had quietly taken root within her own family long before Bobby Brown ever entered her life. For decades, one of the most dominant and persistent narratives in modern pop culture was that the legendary singer Bobby Brown was solely responsible for Whitney Houston's tragic decline and battle with substance abuse. When the couple married in 1992, the media quickly painted a simplistic, highly dramatic picture of a wholesome, pristine pop princess being led astray by an unpredictable, rebellious industry bad boy. However, the publication of Sissy Houston's intimate 2013 memoir, Remembering Whitney, alongside devastating family interviews, shattered this long-standing public myth. Sissy stepped forward to reveal a far more complex and painful historical reality. The roots of Whitney's struggles did not begin with her marriage, but rather in the quiet suburbs of East Orange, New Jersey, years before she ever crossed paths with Bobby Brown. In an emotional 2013 television interview with Oprah Winfrey, Whitney's older brother, Michael Houston, sat alongside his mother Sissy and made a shocking, highly public confession. He admitted that it was actually him, not Bobby Brown, who had first introduced Whitney to recreational drugs in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Michael explained that during their youth, he and Whitney were inseparable, doing absolutely everything together. When Michael began experimenting with substances in their neighborhood, Whitney, who deeply idolized her older brothers and desperately wanted to be included in their tight-knit social circle, naturally followed his lead. This revelation reframed Whitney's history, showing that substance use had unfortunately become a familiar, deeply normalized family secret during her formative teenage years, long before she signed her historic recording contract. This painful truth brought with it a lifetime of crushing guilt and deep regret for Sissy Houston. During those pivotal, developmental years in East Orange, Sissy was a hard-working mother constantly juggling her own busy recording career with the immense, demanding task of managing and training Whitney. Because Sissy was frequently away on promotional tours, headlining club gigs, or focusing all her available mental resources on protecting and directing Whitney's rising career, she developed a tragic blind spot within her own household. She was completely unaware of the activities of her teenage sons, Gary and Michael, and had absolutely no idea that her young, gifted daughter was participating in their secretive drug use. By the time Sissy finally realized the true depth of the situation, the habit had already taken a firm, invisible hold. This late realization was a heavy, agonizing burden Sissy carried for the rest of her life, forever wishing she had been more present to intervene. This hidden battle with substances quickly became directly intertwined with the exhausting dual identity Whitney was forced to maintain. As she climbed to the absolute pinnacle of global stardom, the pressure to remain the immaculate, perfect role model designed by Arista Records grew nearly unbearable. For Whitney, reverting to the carefree, rebellious identity of Nippy became increasingly difficult under the constant glare of the public eye. In this high-pressure environment, substance use transitioned from a casual teenage habit into a private, desperate coping mechanism. It became Nippy's secret, quiet escape from the exhausting, manufactured perfection of Whitney Houston, hidden beneath the elegant gowns, the pristine public speeches, and the most celebrated voice in music history. This silent dependency slowly corroded her inner foundation, while the outside world remained completely blind to her pain. The accumulated psychological trauma and the quiet dependency on substances from her youth ultimately pushed Whitney into a turbulent marriage with Bobby Brown, a journey of self-destruction that her mother could only helplessly watch. Sissy Houston never minced words when it came to her daughter's highly publicized, turbulent marriage to singer Bobby Brown. From the moment the couple wed in 1992, Sissy harbored deep suspicions and profound doubts about the union. In her unvarnished memoir, Remembering Whitney, Sissy wrote that she immediately recognized the relationship as a volatile match that would only fuel Whitney's pre-existing vulnerabilities. While she acknowledged that Whitney's struggles with substances had begun before meeting Bobby, Sissy firmly believed that Bobby's own lifestyle and desire to party acted as a massive, destructive obstacle to Whitney's recovery. To Sissy, the couple acted as toxic enablers for one another, creating a chaotic environment that isolated Whitney from those who truly had her best interests at heart. Sissy maintained until her final days that if Whitney had married someone more stable, or at least someone who did not share and encourage her self-destructive habits, she would have had a much easier time successfully conquering her addiction and reclaiming her legendary career. despite the personal turbulence that overshadowed her later years, culminating in her tragic and untimely passing on February 11th, 2012. Whitney Houston's artistic accomplishments remain a towering monument in music history. Her quantitative legacy is nearly unmatched by any vocalist of the modern era. With more than 220 million records sold worldwide, she is firmly cemented as one of the best-selling music artists of all time. She remains the only artist in history to achieve 7 consecutive #1 hits on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, and her iconic soundtrack for the 1992 film, The Bodyguard, remains the best-selling soundtrack album of all time. These staggering commercial achievements, backed by dozens of prestigious awards, prove that her voice possessed a universal, transcendent resonance that easily surpassed the tabloid sensationalism of her private life, securing her an eternal place in the global musical pantheon. For Sissy Houston, who spent her final years fiercely defending her daughter's memory before passing away on October 7th, 2024. At the age of 91, Whitney's true greatness was never defined by these commercial metrics, charts, or Grammy trophies. Sissy wanted the world to understand that Whitney's ultimate strength lay in the generous soul, the playful spirit, and the deep, unconditional love for her family that belonged to Nippy. Sissy did not want her daughter to be remembered as a tragic pop caricature. She wanted the world to remember a real, flesh-and-blood human being who worked incredibly hard, who tried her absolute best to please everyone around her, and who maintained a profound, childlike faith through it all. This human being was meticulously shaped by the steel discipline of a legendary vocal coach, and the bottomless, protective love of a mother who stood as her unyielding anchor through every triumph and tragedy. The epic rise and devastating fall of Whitney Houston is a complex tapestry of unmatched vocal genius and profound human vulnerability. It is a story that simply cannot be understood without recognizing the quiet, powerful influence of the mother who walked every step of the journey with her. Sissy Houston's relentless vocal training, strict boundaries, and maternal devotion were the foundational pillars that made Whitney's historic ascent possible. As we look back on the incredible lives and legacies of both mother and daughter, their shared devotion to the raw power of song continues to echo through the decades. We invite you to join the conversation and share your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you view Sissy Houston's profound influence on shaping the world's greatest voice? And which of Whitney's performances represents her true, unfiltered soul to you?